Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. Before I introduce our next episode of the Authority File, I want to remind our listeners that we have a brand new podcast. It's called Patron Driven, and it's a narrative-style podcast that brings you crowdsourced library stories where the personal meets the professional. Our first story is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of the Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey in 2017, and the 2 years it took to rebuild. Patron Driven is out now, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, so back to this podcast. We're going to be talking about a new book published by the University of Toronto Press. It's called Minds Alive, Libraries and Archives Now, and it features an amazing collection of essays from a wide range of international scholars. The volume sets out to challenge, in a constructive way, the current ideas around the value of libraries, archives, and those who work in them. In a fundamental way, it acknowledges that the world and the citizenry that inhabits it are rapidly changing and goes on to examine how the profession needs to change alongside. My guest is Dr. Tony Samick. Tony is a professor and chair at the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta. Tony co-edited Minds Alive with Dr. Patricia Demers, who is a distinguished university professor in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. This series is brought to you by the University of Toronto Press. In this third episode, Tony addresses why her book opens with a chapter provocatively titled, Libraries, Why Bother? The book opens with a chapter by Dr. Alice Crawford, who is the Digital Humanities Research Librarian at the University of St. Andrews Library. And it has a provocative title called Libraries, Why Bother? And I'm curious, it seems like a great way to open this collection. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what the chapter addresses, and how it's kind of sets up, in your view, how it might set up the rest of the book.
Sure. Well, I would encourage anyone listening when they have time down the line to just search it up online, the Libraries Around the World 2016 Conference on Libraries, Archives, and Public Life. And you can see the video contribution from Alice there. And once you see her, you'll know why we wanted to open with her.
Okay.
And her chapter is gorgeously written, has an affirmation of values that we care about. In a sense, gets right to the heart of human rights, like the right to the free development of personality. I think her chapter is kind of poetic. It's humanizing. There's pleasure and pain in the way that she presents it. And she really helps kick off challenging perceptions of worth and welcome and control and thinking about repurposing and transformation. And she's just so experienced and I think was playful in a way and cautionary in a way, but we just thought it was a beautifully written poetic piece that would set a really nice tone for going forward. And like I say, if you watch her speaking, you can see she brings a lot of experience to bear on sharing her perspective in a way that's quite artistic and enriching apart from the topic itself.
Right. So yeah, and continuing with that, she notes the rise of a new breed of librarian ethnographers who are tackling sort of this prickly practice of using qualitative research methods to sort of better understand the needs of their community. And this is all kind of in context. It's sort of exploring how libraries can measure their value and communicate their value back to their community. And I'm wondering what you might think is behind this trend and why this sort of particular approach to sort of measuring a library's impact and why it's necessary.
Right. I'll just kind of refer back to something I said a few minutes ago, moving away from this "we serve you" model and "let us come and tell you about what we do" to more of a listening, community-led model. But also historically, we did a lot of counting, and that was, as she references, that kind of metrics, and that's really problematic when you're trying to address barriers as we are. So if you think about if you're counting circulation in a collection and making decisions around that, well, you know what's moved, you know what's been checked out, but you don't necessarily know what's been used in house, unless you're doing a particular kind of checking where you're scanning and seeing what's been left on tables and so forth, and then it's a little bit more different in environments where if you think about in a high school library with trying to serve GLBTQ2 plus youth, you may have an honor system where kids can take stuff out with no tracking so that they feel safe and protected. And so family members and people in their lives don't know. So when you start to look at considerations like that, the traditional metrics of counting and tracking and using the records becomes problematic.
Right.
So I think it's what she's trying to do is really just inform and drive broader attention to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and thinking about the need for more sophisticated ways and metrics of understanding where we're at and where we need to be, and that it's going to involve a lot of listening and thinking about barriers and the new kinds of barriers that come with technology.
I really like this chapter, and one of the reasons why is she really sticks with that question in the title, why bother? And there are a couple of really challenging instances that she writes about, and one of them is that she's kind of acknowledging that all of the research that librarians are conducting to prove their value, seems to be heading toward potentially an unfavorable conclusion. And she says, I'm going to quote her a little bit here. She says, it's almost as though we can see the careful metrics of the studies we impose on our libraries crunching too inexorably towards a conclusion we do not like, and that we lunge towards the stop button before the final calculation can be broadcast. So I think she's acknowledging that, yes, as she says, fiscal returns from public libraries can be thin at best. And yes, students can actually conduct much of their research without setting foot in the building. But then she notes, she kind of pivots towards this emotional value that might be getting lost in all of the research. And I'm wondering if you talk about that a little bit. How does she justify the importance of people's emotional and aspirational attitudes toward
Right.
libraries?
This is when thank you for picking up on this chapter because as it's so accessible and fun and warm and welcoming to read, and underneath it's really sophisticated and kind of poking. And I think Pat and I agree that in terms of justifying her pivot, in a sense, she's really appealing to, it's humanizing and poetic, as I said. She's appealing to curiosity and surprise and that train spotting impulse that we have, and the hunger for difference, the lure of the mysterious, the unheard of, the unknown, what's out there, and a personal satisfaction and discovery. And as I said at the outset, part of my background is in librarianship and human rights. And I think what she does is really connect us to in her own way, thinking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and how much of those articles really do relate to humans' interaction with information. In the way that is conditional to respect for the dignity of human beings. So we can think about, articles in that declaration around confidentiality and equality of opportunity and privacy, the right to be protected from torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and to freedom of opinion and expression, and to peaceful assembly and association, which is such a powerful thing that happens around cultural institutions, the right to economic, social, and cultural rights, the right to education, profoundly the right to participate in the cultural life of the community, which it's the kind of activity that is fostered by these institutions. And then there's also the right to the protection of the moral and material interests concerning any scientific, literary, or artistic production. So when we think about the kind of information and works that we want to access and who created those and what's life and labor like for them. So underneath her chapter, we really think about individuals and institutions and society, kind of at all those 3 levels. So it's a very powerful chapter, and it certainly deserved to be our opener.
Yeah, no, for sure. Exactly. You just heard from Tony Samek, who co-edited Minds Alive, Libraries and Archives Now, along with Dr. Patricia Demers. Tony is professor and chair at the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta, and Patricia is a distinguished university professor in the Department of English and Film Studies, also at the University of Alberta. The series is brought to you by the University of Toronto Press. Join us next week for our final episode of this series when Tony explores the unique opportunities for libraries and their archives, institutional partnerships, and how we might view libraries and their roles in light of the challenges we're all going through now with COVID-19.
We need our libraries, archives and museum workers more than ever. And, every time we see in the media the daily updates, it's like we need to save this information so we can understand it better later, because a lot of it is misinformation and disinformation, and some of it's people would say propaganda, and some of it's truth, but somebody's got to sort that out, and we're not able to do it all on the same day.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino. And all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.